I'm Kyle. Um, like Jamie said, I'm a first year grad student at Caltech doing theoretical slash numerical astrophysics. Um, I'm going to be working with a group on their code, which simulates binary black holes to extreme precision and using Einstein's equations, which is really cool. Let me share my screen because I have slides. All right, can you see it? Okay, cool. So I'm going to assume that most of you guys are either seniors who are applying to grad schools right now or juniors who want to get a little bit of a head start on their applications just to get a lot of information. So letters of rec are, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of your application next to your personal statement because they give grad schools a a really good inside look into your abilities as a researcher in the eyes of your advisors and professors. And so this they take this heavily into account because you're going there to do research, and so they want to know about your specific ability to do research. So probably one of the most important questions about letters of rec is who do you ask? Um, Typically, for most grad school applications, you ask three people. They want three letters of recommendation. And these three people should be either professors or researchers, specifically somebody with a PhD, but not necessarily postdocs and definitely not grad students. Um, they really want to hear from people, from advisors, basically, people who run groups. However, if you are in a group and you don't work with your advisor directly a lot, and you work more with the postdocs or grad students, you can ask them to give your advisors input to put in your letter of recommendation, and that can be really strong because you have a closer working relationship with your grad student or postdoc. Um, and the people you ask should complement your application and your personal statement. So typically, when you are writing your personal statement, you're going to include all of your research that you've done in undergrad, and um, typically you're going to want your advisors that you did your research with to write you letters, whom you also mentioned in your application. And so they go hand in hand and give the grad students a more complete picture of your research ability. Um, an additional thing is that you can also ask your advisors or your professors on where to apply. They probably have a pretty good of idea of who's doing really good research right now, what schools to avoid. Um, they can probably give you maybe some like insider information on like diamonds in the rough, some like maybe smaller grad schools that won't show up online, but still have really strong programs in whatever you're interested in. So, however, I know a lot of undergrads, including myself, I only had two research opportunities in undergrad. So that only gives me two letters of recommendation. And so if you're in that situation, the third person that you would ask is typically one of your professors from a class, your instructor. Now, you don't want to just ask any instructor. You don't want to go to whoever taught 212 for you and be like, hey, remember me in that 500-person lecture hall? Can you write me a letter? Because they're not going to know who you are. It would it's probably best to ask a professor who taught a smaller class, one of the upper level classes, but also some professor that knows who you are. Maybe you went to office hours a lot, you raised your hand in class a lot, so they remember your face, but somebody that is memorable to you. Also, some it would be helpful if that class is in your research area. So for me, because I wanted to go into computation, I took a computational physics course with Brian Clark, 498. And so I specifically asked him for a letter of rec because it was a really small class, maybe like 15 to 20 people, and it was also in my area, so he could speak to my ability to do computation. Now, grad schools are going to get your all your transcripts and everything, so they can tell how you did in your class. This is more the letter of rec from a professor, from your instructor, is more to see how you work, see how you handle difficult problems and stuff like that. Not necessarily just to say, hey, I got a good grade in your class. They should talk about your skills in completing the coursework and everything. Next is when to ask, basically now. Um, Professors are very, very busy and also very, very forgetful. So it's best if you give them as much time as possible to write your letters. If you're a junior and you're going to be doing an REU or an internship over next summer before you apply, best to ask at the end of the internship, hey, I'm going to be applying to grad school in the fall. Would you be able to write me a letter of rec? And so that gives them plenty of time to know that they have to do this thing for you. Also, reminders. Like I said, professors are very forgetful, so you will have to remind them somewhat often um, to write your letter of rec. They'll probably procrastinate it for a while. That's just what professors do, unfortunately. So you have to really be on top of asking them and then keeping them up to date. And so another big one is how do I ask? This can be kind of like a nerve-wracking thing because it's a really important part of your application. They're professors, maybe you're nervous talking to professors around everything. And so first thing I would say is remain calm. I know easier said than done, but they are probably already expecting you to ask them if you've done research with them. So it's not going to come like a big shock to them, like, oh, I have to write you a letter. Oh no, no, they're going to be expecting it. Normally, I would say asking them in person is better, just because it is a big thing, and so out of sign of respect, you just go ask in person. Obviously, during COVID, you can't do that, so probably set up a Zoom meeting with them. Super easy, and you can just talk for 15, 20 minutes. This next bullet point is a piece of advice that a grad student gave me when I was applying to grad school. Don't just ask your professor to write you a letter of recommendation, because typically professors are going to want you to get into grad school, so they're gonna write you good letters of rec. But on the off chance that you have a professor that writes how they feel, or one of those instructors that didn't know you as well as maybe your research advisor, is specifically ask for a strong letter. This will get the professor thinking about you when they when they sit down to write your letter, and they're going to be like, okay, I got to write this letter for Kyle. He asked me to write him a strong letter, and then he'll think about the professor will think about your qualifications and everything. Then, after you ask them, they're probably going to tell you what they need from you. This could be deadlines, possibly your transcript, or anything else that they possibly need. And so it's good practice to follow up this with an email, probably day after, 2 days after. I've always found that an Excel document is the easiest way to do this, because you could have all of your grad schools in a column, and then all the deadlines in the next, and then links and anything else they could possibly need. All right there is super organized, so they don't have to think. And this is because even though they are writing your letter of rec, it is your responsibility to make sure that they have everything they need. They shouldn't be going and looking for any information. You should give that to them. I have this note at the bottom of the slide because I couldn't really find a better place to put it in the presentation, but make sure in your application to waive your right to view the letter. You are, when you ask somebody to write you a letter of rec, you are entrusting that they will give an honest and accurate representation of your research abilities. And so if you don't waive your right, grad schools are going to be really suspicious about this. Like, why is this person not trusting their advisor to write them a letter of rec without them looking at it first? So just make sure you waive your right. And there'll be instructions on all of the applications to do this. It's just a little box you click whenever you do anything. So next, when are they due? Check your application. It differs from applications. The most common one that I've seen is that your letters of rec are due before the application deadline. So even if you submit your application like a couple weeks before the deadline, the letters are still due by the deadline. However, I did have one application to Penn State where they didn't actually send the link to all the letter writers until after I submitted the application. And so that's a very different time frame because all my applications are due at different times. However, usually groups of them are due at the same time. So I think the big days are like December 15th, early January, and then January 15th. And so you're going to want to keep track of those, know which ones are due when, and then be able to talk to your letter writers on when they are due. And this goes back to the reminders and communication with your letter writers. So before each big group of applications is due, if they haven't submitted your application, you can keep emailing them and be like, hey, the deadline is coming up soon. Can you please, just letting you know the application deadline is coming up soon, please submit these soon. However, don't worry if they don't get it in like immediately when the deadline happens. Grad schools don't start processing your application 12:01 the next day. They usually take a little bit to compile all the applications. So if they go a couple days over, it's not the end of the world, but not the best. Make sure they know when the application deadlines are. So now that your application is submitted, what do you do? So if you need, like I said before, notify your letter writers so they can submit those weird applications that don't send links until afterwards. Also, you want to send a thank you to your letter writers. Now, you can wait until after your final application is submitted to do this, but it is good practice to send a thank you, just a quick short email or dropping by into their office saying, hey, thank you for doing this. My final app is submitted. I really hope I get into grad school. Working with you is great and everything. And then relax because you did it until your next app is due, though, which is probably in like 15 days after that. What if something goes wrong? Because it is possible that something goes wrong. Your first point of communication should be the graduate admissions office. They handle things like this all the time. So if your letter writer is late or something, just email the graduate admissions office, be like, hey, I know it's past the deadline, but I submitted my application, but the letter writer still hasn't submitted. Is it okay if they submit a few days late? If there's any complications with your application or anything, contact the graduate admissions. They're usually very helpful. And yeah, if it's something on the letter side, first make sure that it's not on your side of the application. So refresh your page, reload it, close the application, and reopen it if you need to. And then if it still says that the letter writers haven't submitted, even if they say they've submitted, check then to see if it's on their end, because I think one of my friends had it where the professor like loaded the letter of rec into the system, but they clicked the like save button, not the submit button. And so they thought they submitted it, but they actually didn't. And then the deadline passed and it was a whole thing. So then make sure that it actually says submitted on their end and that they actually did it. And then if all else fails, resend the link. There's always a button in the application that says resend link to to your professor's email, and you can do that, and that will give them another opportunity to submit. So the key points to remember are that you need to ask 3 people, and they should be either your research advisors from your experiences in undergrad, whether it be an REU or an internship or whatever, or if you're looking for a third person, one of your instructors from an upper level class that knows who you are and can speak to your ability to do stuff in your field. Ask your letter writers as soon as possible. They're busy people. So giving them more time is better. Clearly communicate the deadlines. Like I said, all of this is on you because it is your application. The letter writers only have the responsibility of writing and submitting it. You got to have to give them where to submit, when to submit, and all that kind of information. Remind their letter writers often. So if you're like a couple months out from the deadline, probably not good to email them every single day asking if they've submitted. Maybe once a month is good. But if you're getting into that last week before a deadline, it's okay to email them every single day asking if they've done it. And then if still day of, if they haven't done it, like email them every hour or something. Try to call them, do something. Walk into their, if you're in person, I'd say run into their office and yell at them. Not actually, but you know what I mean. Once your application is submitted, thank them for doing this thing for you and helping you get into grad school. And then if you have any problems, either contact the graduate admissions office for help or talk to your letter writers to make sure that that the letters were submitted correctly. Other than that, that is it. Do you guys have any questions?
Feel free to unmute yourself or drop your question in the chat and I can read them aloud. I do have a question. So I was told if you submit your application early, you have a better chance of getting fellowships and funded. So if you submit your application early, when the letter of your recommenders send it in, will that determine fundings and fellowships?
There are a few, there may be like a few applications that have like, if you want to also apply for like say NSF funding or other fellowships or something like that, apply before this certain date. And that's the date you should give your letter writers. But after that, I don't think it matters too much. All of my applications that I did, like they didn't have that special time period, and I was still considered for fellowships and whatever equally as much as anybody else. I submitted all mine like day before application deadline, and I still got a fellowship here for the whole first year. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's not like undergrad where you have a priority deadline that you have and you get considered first and whatever. That's not as really that common in grad school.
Okay. While we wait for other people to ask their questions, I also have another question.
Sure.
So for the instructor, is it better to have someone in your field of interest, or is it better to have someone that you have had more interaction with?
I assume that means like these are exclusive things where like you like there's not a professor that satisfies both, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say probably somebody who knows you better, because then the letter will be more personal. Because if you ask somebody that's like in your field, but you didn't like talk to them a lot, you didn't go to office hours, whatever, they're really only going to be able to like talk about your grades. And that's something that grad schools can already get from your transcripts. They don't really need a professor to say, The student got an A minus in my class. They're a decently hard worker. Um, they're gonna look more for more personal things that give them stuff that grades won't necessarily give them. So I would say the professor that you were closer with or saw you more. Uh, Also, as a side note, whoever whoever has been in SWIP before, Hannah says hi. She wanted me to tell you all that she says hi.
Do you see her often?
Yeah, both of the I'm in two, well, technically three classes,